What would you do if one night you were reading your favorite author when suddenly a criminal burst in and grabbed a girl and you ended up dead at the hands of this guy for trying to help her?
Interesting.
However, you are reborn as a puppy and you are adopted by the girl you helped before, who was super weird because she says she can understand you and this was no one other than your favorite writer. Well, this is what Inuto Hasami is all about. The anime starts with a waifu who is quietly writing in her notebook and at the same time her puppy was reading a book. Out of nowhere, the two start having a strange conversation that leads to a fight with a pair of scissors. From here, we see the dual behavior of this girl. But in reality, this story has a past, so as a flashback, we go back a couple of days where we meet Kazuhito Harumi, a high school boy obsessed with reading and loneliness to the point of living surrounded by mountains of books. Kazuhito was quite an antisocial boy who only talked to the workers in his bookshop and had a fictional love affair with his favorite novelist, who is described as one of the best authors in almost any literary genre. But despite being a genius, nobody knows anything about his personal life or his interest for future work. But all this will change when suddenly we see that the young man is quietly reading his novel in a coffee shop, and then the place is robbed by an armed bad guy. In his act of confrontation, he stands in front of the thief and covers a beautiful girl who was being attacked and is sent straight into heaven. In the midst of his journey, the boy cares little about seeing his life flash before his eyes. He really only has one thing he will regret for all eternity, and it is not being able to read his author's next book. The days go by and little by little he gets used to his new body and his new life. One day he gets a bit sentimental because he hasn't read his precious book for so long. After a week, one morning, Kirihime Natsuno appears, a girl with perfect scissor skills who, despite looking a little suspicious about her abilities, ends up adopting the dog and takes him to the basement. Once in the place, we learn that the waifu had a completely distorted humor and quite fast hands. She also had the power to read minds, which allows her to understand what other people feel, or in this case, what Kazuhito was thinking. So after a few strange and cruel jokes, the boy realizes that the woman in front of him is the same woman he had rescued in the incident in the cafeteria. And when she finds out what happened, she offers him a place to live and free access to her personal library. While they were talking for a while, he is surprised to find out that she works as a novelist under the pseudonym of Shinobu, which drives him crazy because now, besides having the opportunity to read all the works he wants, he will be living with the same author he admires so much. At this point, the dog will have to adapt to his new lifestyle, mood swings, and days full of work. But first, they go to Kazuhito's old flat to see what useful things they can find and put an end to it. However, on the way to the place, our protagonist meets some rather curious characters, an idol, who for some reason doesn't seem to have a good relationship with Kirihime. Anyway, after a few hours, they arrive at Kazuhito's flat, where they want to check the room since the only place where the thief can hide is in these cellars. Let's remember that in the incident, the bad guy stole the young man's wallet, his keys, and credentials. So their assumption was correct because as soon as the guy hears a noise in the next room, he runs out. It turns out that he spent all his time reading Shinobu's works and memorizing the fighting techniques and attacks described in each of the stories, thus creating an opponent to match our girl. Or so we thought, because after a while she simply pulls out her scissors and in 2 moves leaves him badly wounded, ready for the dog to take revenge for what he did to him in the cafeteria, but he decides to do the opposite and saves his life, by confessing that inside his heart he can see a lover in reading and that maybe in the future he can become a better person if he follows the right path. She is very angry and reproaches him for the decision he made, confessing that she feels guilty for being the reason that caused his death and that is why she wants to avenge the person who saved her life one day. The protagonist lays her down on the floor and in reflective mode tells her that she shouldn't feel that way, because at the end of the day, he only did what she would have done for anyone else because thanks to the way she writes her books, he was able to see through her and thus know her true personality, ending with the fact that from now on, her thoughts will live in his heart. With this last thing, the girl bursts into tears, and later that same day we see that on their way back home, Kirihime confesses to Kazuhito that she is starting to develop feelings for him. But as this is a new sensation, she doesn't know for sure if it is a real feeling or just a hot flash. Anyway, the main character bothers her saying comments out of place and quickly changes the loving attitude of the crazy woman with the scissors as she runs him all over the neighborhood, starting their real new life of madness together. On the other hand, we see that a girl offers a family altar with a picture of our boy, and quickly we see a scene from when he was still alive, in which his little sister enters his room to wake him up and tell him that breakfast is ready. But out of nowhere, the shadow of his owner appears behind his back and scares him so much. After calming down a bit, After realizing that he just had a nightmare, the protagonist starts to worry a lot because he hasn't heard from his family for a long time. All of this is gone when he barely raises his head when he sees an albino woman asleep in the living room of the flat. With some fear, he approaches to see who is it, and after having a conversation in which it seems that she can read his thoughts too, he finally realizes that, in fact, she is only lacking a couple of screws. After a few minutes, Kirihime arrives in the room and introduces Susana Hiraki, who was there to have a meeting about her next novel. Here, the albino tells Shinobu that her work is rubbish, to which he calmly replies that she already knows it because she hasn't had any inspiration to write good stories for a long time. While the protagonist sees how little by little this lady is destroying the ego of his favorite author, we realize that the two of them have a rather particular work dynamic. Before leaving, this strange woman lets them know that there are some pretty strong rumors about a psychopath in the neighborhood, which generates some interest in her. That same day, she confesses to the protagonist that since his arrival, she hasn't had a bit of inspiration, but in spite of this, she knows that he is not the problem. Anyway, the next morning, the albino makes her new appearance, only now she brings more news about the crazy stabber. After making a plan and getting their courage up, the couple decides to go out in search of the criminal in order to give her some new airs and inspiration. However, in the middle of their investigation, the blonde girl appears again, who is one of Shinobu's direct competitors. Apparently, these two had some rivalry for the genres on which their works were based, and they have been looking for each other for a long time to face each other in a duel, but for several months Kirihime has been ignoring her. Then they are simply interrupted by her security words. Leaving this aside, the protagonist comes to the conclusion that all the victims of the psychopath have been people who buy books from his owner. But before they can complete their idea, they are interrupted by a noise coming directly from the shopping center. Already in the place, we see that the affected one was the goodbye Afro, and besides that, in the middle of the crowd, our girl managed to detect a suspicious person, so without thinking twice, she goes out behind him, leaving her little dog alone helpless. After a while, we see how innocent Hazuhito is kidnapped and taken to his old room, where for some reason his little sister recognizes him even though he is in his animal form. We quickly go to Shinobu, who in the end lost track of the suspect. But the good thing is that in the middle of the street she finds a clue that might be useful for her later on. Back with the protagonist, we see that although the girl seems to understand what she says, she was clearly a little crazy because the impact of losing the only family she had left was more than enough to now have a nervous breakdown and think that that dog is his dead brother. The girl was right and even tried to give him some curry to test her theory, or by completely refuses to eat it because of previous experiences he knows that she cooks horrible. Meanwhile, the kidnappers decide to go out to buy a couple of ingredients that were missing, and Kazuhito realizes that through the window an intimidating girl has been stalking them all this time. As expected, this situation makes the combined jealousy forces him to take her puppy and ask him a few intimidating questions about this girl. After the protagonist explains and manages to convince her that he was simply kidnapped by his sister, Madoka, she decides to pass the subject and shows the clue that she found in the middle of the chase. They both talk for a while and come to the conclusion that the stabber must be a person who has a strong resentment towards Shinobu. She immediately thinks that the main suspect is her sister, but Kazuhito manages to stop her and makes her think twice before she commits something foolish. But the next morning, the couple returns to the streets to continue with their investigation. Suddenly, Susuna arrives and informs her boss that not long ago there was a rumor that a person was destroying her books in the middle of a park, and the two decide to go and see what clues they can find. Once on the scene, our detectives run into Madoka herself, who at first wanted to fight, but after the protagonist asks her not to hurt one of the only important people left in his life, the waifu just decides to ask her a question about the burned books and leaves without a trace. Later that day, Kirihime tells her puppy that his sister probably considers her and her works as the cause of his death. Also, in the list of priorities of the human Kazuhito, first was Shinobu and then his family. With this in mind, the protagonist asks his owner to please help him train the monster he has created, to which he surprisingly accepts without hesitation, because apparently she always had in mind that Madoka would sooner or later end up finding the house of the mysterious author. At this point, the crazy girl confesses that thanks to the hidden tracker that our boy has on his necklace, it was quite easy to find the whereabouts of her hiding place. So Kirihime has no choice but to tell her that she is the woman he has been looking for all this time. In other words, the author of the book. After complaining about the fact that she stole all those priceless moments with her brother and also listening to the part of the story in which Kazuhito dies in the cafeteria to save her life, Madoka decides to kidnap him again and jumps out of the window. After a few hours, we see how in the park Madoka confesses to the little dog that the pain of losing a loved one is what drove her to look for him desperately. But now she understands that he is gone and that she can't carry that burden forever. However, things get a little tense when Kirihime arrives on the scene, showing us a giant multi-purpose knife with which she supposedly wanted to confront Kirihime's scissors. The two fight for a while and Madoka transforms her weapon into several tools, even using it in bazooka mode to stop our waifu. But all her attempts were useless since she was at a much lower level. After the fight, the two talk for a while, and ironically, they become friends, and here Madoka clarifies that she is not the rumored murderer, and that regarding why she burned the book, she was simply doing it because of a recommendation that her brother gave her some time ago. With all this in mind, the protagonist finally realizes that the real Stever was always right under his nose, and it turns out that it was Usuna. Later that day, she confesses to the little dog that all that show was to help her boss find the necessary motivation to write better works. However, to the surprise of both of them, Kirihime falls from the sky and confronts her editor because apparently she always had control of her movements, and from the beginning she knew that the murderer was just a show to help her with her creative block. And to top it off, she shows us all the drafts with fresh ideas that Susuna will have to review from now on, because she knows is back and with even more enthusiasm. The next morning, while the couple accompany Madoka to the train station, our waifu gives permission to the young woman to treat the dog as her brother. He seems a bit cruel, but actually has a very kind heart. Minutes later, the crazy editor solves the doubt about the killer's whereabouts, thus finally ending the whole investigation into the Starburst scandal. Later that same day, we see that poor Kazuhito is literally kept as the rent dog, as he is frequently sent to Sakura's shop, where on behalf of his owner he borrows hundreds of books that either he or she needs to read or to get some inspiration. The real problem starts when Yayoi, the manager's younger sister, secretly tells the protagonist that this might be the last time they will see each other, as they are going to move to the city in a couple of weeks. The worried boy tells his owner about this, who at first doesn't think much of it, but after hearing the story about the bookshop and knowing that it is a place of great sentimental value to him, as it was the first and only place where he felt accepted by others, she has a nagging feeling that maybe she can do something to prevent them from leaving. The next day he goes to the shop again, but this time he sees how the two sisters are fighting, and Yayoi takes him in her arms and takes him to a playground near to the neighborhood. This is where the little girl confesses that in reality the business is about to go bankrupt, and that if it doesn't improve in the last few days, they will have to close the place permanently. And this is how she innocently sets in motion her plan to promote the bookshop using the little dog as an advertising pet, so that after walking through the streets of the city for a long time, she briefly sees Kirihime jealous of all the photos of her animal on the internet. In the end, we return to the same park of the morning, leaving aside the numerous attempts of the main character to cheer up Yayoi. We see that again our waifu arrives to save the day. And this one confesses that thanks to the tracker of his necklace, she could find it, and so she's already here in the middle of his problem, so she decides to give a hand to the little girl and to take her back to the bookshop. Once the two little sisters forgive each other for the inconveniences of the morning, Sakura says that everything was a misunderstanding, explaining that in reality they are not going to close the shop, and that regarding the constant discussions that their parents were having, simply this is their rare form to demonstrate how much they love each other. In the end, Kazuhito tries to thank his owner for helping him solve the problem and also for giving him a chance to live by her side. But as usual, the sentimental moment is cut short when the poor dog has to run away from Kirihime's scissors again. A few days later, an afternoon of reading that seems supposedly calm for the protagonist turns into a somewhat turbulent situation as his owner asks him the strange favor of helping her to find her lost bra. So the protagonist has no choice but to accept and begin to perceive the essence of the waifu, but she misunderstands him and sends him flying with a single blow. For his good luck, Usuna arrives as a replacement in this mission, which gives him the perfect opportunity to escape and return to read his little books. Both go to the gym, where supposedly is the last place where she saw her underwear. Only as they did not find it better, they stayed training together to pass the time, and meanwhile continue thinking where the last update may be. Back with Kazuhito, we see how the bra was all the time under his blanket, because he remembers that last night he was sniffing through his clothes, but he found a blanket to cover himself from the cold. And that's where he accidentally took his owner's bra. Scared of a violent reaction she may have, the dog decides to find a place to hide the evidence and avoid problems. But the point here is that Kirihime is already ahead of him and in parallel is looking for him, so she thinks that he has something to do with the whereabouts of her underwear. So the protagonist tries to dig a hole in the middle of the park until he is completely distracted by a beautiful maid dancing in the middle of the place. This is where we meet Sachi Moribi, who notices his presence and quickly turns his broom into a weapon, thus starting a very intense chase that almost ends badly. But in one of those to dodge an attack, the dog jumps without thinking and is almost run over by a truck. For his good luck, her waifu arrives just in time, and she does some fancy acrobatics so she managed to save her defenseless animal. And now she gets ready to beat up the crap out of the person responsible for the accident, only to find that the maid cuts her gun and leaves to continue fulfilling her duties as a maid for her still unknown boss. When the situation is calmer, she finds the evidence of the bra in Kazuhito's backpack. But she doesn't tell him anything because we see that in one part of the clothes there is a scene in the shape of a little dog, which he interprets as if his owner acts tender and adorable, he will be saved from punishment for having lied. But the opposite happens, and once again he is shaped by the sharp scissors of his owner, thus overlooking the fact that an unknown person was watching them closely. Sometime later, the couple goes to a hot springs inn that is called the Holy Land of Swords, because literally, the decoration of the place are only lethal weapons. And to top it all off, we are also given the surprise that Madoka is accompanying them on this trip. After all, she was invited by our waifu who wanted to get closer to her future sister-in-law. Before entering the room, the protagonist notices a suspicious pink booklet, but doesn't pay much attention to it because even more important is the fact that in this place, Kirihime has her own room where there are many decorations of scissors and sharp things, and also has some pictures of her childhood. After the crazy girls try to take the dog to the place where she's going to stay, she has a slight argument with her sister-in-law. All the girls meet at the hot springs to take a relaxing bath and talk for a while. While each one talks about life and studies, we see that being with so many people is bad for our waifu because it doesn't allow her to spend time with her dog and complete the list of activities she has programmed in the pink notebook. And to top it all off, not even Kazuhito himself shows the slightest interest in spending some time with his owner, so the problems are starting to pull up in the plans of our young couple. The next morning, on an attempt to go to a date in town, Maxi happened to be in the same place as them for some reason, but as usual, they just ignore her and went to the store that Kirihime likes. Once they arrived, we see that apparently everyone wanted to go on vacation because the maid had also gone to the same place to buy a sharpening stone. And although the moment is quite brief, for the first time the two managed to have a normal conversation. The same day, while they were on their way to the inn, the waifu runs into the same place that some time ago was in charge of taking a family picture of them. So to take advantage of the opportunity, they both enter to take one and thus be able to keep this moment together. The main character notices that there is something wrong with the place because from the beginning he has hinted the staff working there acts a little strange in the presence of Kirihime. But anyway, she decides to leave it aside and go to the hot springs to sharpen her scissors with a new stone. At the same time, we see that for no reason all the workers go into a kind of trance, alerting Kazuhito, who runs into the showers and warns his owner of the dangerous situation. Kirihime reveals that the same thing happened to her a long time ago and that all these people are actually a group who only want to hurt her. The only problem is that her scissors aren't sharp, so fighting in this condition will be like giving away the fight. However, both her Doji and Madoka enter the scene and give her enough time to fix her weapon, and now she can start the fight. After some fancy moves between Kirihime and her sister-in-law, the two are victorious but not before completely destroying the pink bullet that the girl prepared so much for this trip. In the end, the inn had to close the next day for repairs, and while our little group was going back home, we saw in the distance that again the mysterious man was watching them. But more important was the fact that the couple promised to return another time to the hot springs, but this time they will do it alone, showing the photo they took hours before the incident. Weeks went by and they are in what it seems to be a normal day, and to start the morning off right, they go to buy a few novels, and they acquired a new work of the author Hotaru Fujimaki, and as usual, the mysterious guy follows them closely everywhere. So far, everything was going well, or at least it seemed so, because back home the protagonist instantly notices that in his absence someone was in the apartment, and thanks to the fact that he has perfect control of the shelves, he easily managed to recognize one that was left over, which by chance is the same one they bought in Sakura's store a couple of hours ago. So after examining the work carefully, Kazuhito notices a slight resemblance with the style of Shinobu that even the same author recognizes. Thus, the novel of Hotaru shares a method of expression similar to hers. So with this in mind, the couple returns to their role of detectives and they start to investigate about the mysterious writer, but all their attempts are in vain since they can't find anything about the subject on the internet. As a last resort, she turns to Suzuna's crazy girl, who to their surprise does have some relevant information about the suspect's whereabouts. So once they locate his hideout, they arrange a meeting and go directly to consult him. As expected, all this turned to be a trap to lead them to the lair of a group of criminals, which in the end didn't help so much because Kirihime, with her good fighting styles and using her poor little projectile dog, managed to defeat all the gangsters. After a few minutes, the mysterious man finally shows his face, and we finally meet Susan Osawa, the leader of this gang and the father of Hotaru Fujimaki, who was also responsible for entering the apartment and leaving the extra books on the bookshelf. After a shady interrogation, the man confesses that this whole show was at request of his daughter, who is apparently a great fan of Shinobu, but her father is completely opposed to our waifu because he considers her to be a bad influence on his little boy. Finally, we also learn that the attacks were actually the work of his sinister girl and that the poor old man had nothing to do with it because he only wanted to help Hotaru fulfill her dreams. The couple then gets an address where they can find Hotaru. We find that her hiding place is the old school of the protagonist, which from the beginning looks quite suspicious. Before proceeding with the investigation, Kazuhito makes a stop by the library to recover a manuscript that he had hidden when he was studying at this high school. However, in the middle of the darkness, he notices a shy girl who apparently hides more mysteries than her quiet personality appears. To better understand this situation, we have to go back to the time when our boy was still a human. One day, when he was reading quietly, he found a book and unconsciously read it out loud. And after finishing it, he realized that this work was by Hami Osawa. She was ashamed and asked him to forgive her for wasting his time in a silly thing like that, to which the protagonist asked her to please finish her novel so he could know the end of the story. She finally agreed, and weeks later she had read the outcome of the manuscript, which despite not being perfect and above all having a style very similar to Shinobu's, it was good enough for a girl to follow that path and thus fulfill her dream of being a famous writer. It is here where both keep the work in a place where only they know. At present, although the young girl doesn't understand anything of what the animal says, she interprets that right in front of her is the one who was once her only friend. Hami reveals that she is indeed Hotaru, and that her pseudonym, besides being a play on words with Kazuhito's name, was also a kind of reminder about the promise they made some time ago. Apparently, the girl's objective was to defeat Kirihime, but not physically, but in a literary duel. And to her great surprise, she accepts the challenge, which in a few words consists of the winner being the first to complete a 100-page manuscript. As expected, Kirihime cornered the poor beginner that even though she tried to use all kinds of techniques, she couldn't beat the mighty Shinobu. So once she runs out of tricks, she decides to use her final method, which is that through certain keywords, the readers are manipulated mentally, and that's how she can control people and give them specific orders, such as the group of bad guys, or in this case, where her enemy wants to hurt herself. However, her intellect is far superior to her desperation, as Kirihime manages to complete the novel with her mouth alone and wins the writing challenge, and leaves Hami on the floor. In addition, she tells the girl not to give up on her dream of becoming a great writer and to focus first on improving and finishing the manuscript she had left incomplete, but that she can also learn a little from her if she wants, thus starting a real relationship without studying and teacher. Later that day, Madoka goes to visit the apartment of her couple, and as it couldn't be otherwise, the sister continues determined to prepare a curry that Kazuhito can like, because since they were real siblings, this one never liked the flavor of her food. And in spite of the fact that in a brief moment it seemed that finally the girl managed to do something worthwhile, the main character, when seeing the strange blue aspect brother, decides to escape to his favorite bookstore. After spending some quite calm hours seeing how Sakura kindly treated her customers, things turn around when out of nowhere, Max's bodyguards arrive to the stores with the strange request to buy it. Until the last book, the half of the mysterious Momiji Kimegaji, and of her dare Shinobu. The protagonist decides not to stay with the doubt and begins his investigation to see what they want with all these books. But in the middle of the road, he runs into the maid who tries to attack the dog again, but this time his owner was more alert and arrived just in time to rescue him. Soon, Max appears in a helicopter, revealing herself as the one responsible for untying the bookstores and thus supposedly disappear their direct competition, without obviously realizing that instead of harming them, it's actually benefiting them. Because in the end, money is money. The blonde challenges Kirihime to participate in the 9-story tower writing contest, which in a nutshell consists of writing 9 stories for 9 different judges. So that once they decide the winners, she can receive the title of the best novelist in the world. It is here where Sachi gets angry with Maxi because for her, the only one who can be considered number one is Momiji, who all this time turned out to be her boss. When it seemed that they were going to fight, the bodyguards enter the scene and take the little girl to continue working on their pending murders, leaving everyone with the desire of a good fight. The main character returns to his favorite bookstore only to find the surprise that both Sakura and Hami are going to enter the same school, and to top it off, Madoka also gives the same announcement because according to her, this is the only way to continue the legacy that her little brother left before going to a better life. This news surprises Kazuhito so much that he gives himself away and ends up being forced to eat the curry of the crazy girl. Only this time he had to swallow a dish that looks more like a rainbow vomit. Sometime later, the couple receives the unexpected visit of Suzuna, which at first is completely ignored, but when she mentions that it is time for Shinobu to make her official appearances to the media, she attracts her attention. To better understand the situation, we go back to the beginnings, where in the company's recommendation, her public identity was kept secret, since at that point in history, she was simply a girl who grew very well and made up stories that caught the attention of the readers. However, her publishers considered that now is a prudent time for the young girl to make her big debut, so that she can keep up with her competition like Maxi or Momiji, and from time to time interact with her fans or with the press. It is at this point where only the puppy is paying attention because it seems that this idea is not to Kirihime's liking, who prefers to ignore them and continue working on the draft of her new story. Suzuna takes this opportunity to start working on the costume that her boss will wear at the supposed book signing she is going to have soon, leaving us with several scenes of cosplays at super speed. Just before Suzuna sees her in a school swimsuit, she stops and makes it clear once and for all that she is not willing to reveal her true identity. However, what she didn't expect is that this was part of the plan to create distraction and put some alcohol in the coffee, which will help them to convince her to accept the proposal. The problem here is that the opposite happens, and to our boy's surprise, his owner now has a more loving and innocent air, which in short turns out to be a severe misunderstanding to the point that Kirihime not only started dreaming about the marriage, but also plans the honeymoon and the support family that both are going to have in the future. He begins to feel uncomfortable with this new attitude that his owner is showing him because he's not used to receive so much love from her. The romantic moment is interrupted by a reaction of her body to the exaggerated amount of alcohol that Suzuna gave her. In the end, nothing happened, and the waifu was as if nothing had happened.